Don't be evil. These three words are the motto of the world's leading internet giant. But over the last few years, the demand has privacy advocates wondering if Google doth protest too much. It's no secret that Google collects and sells data, but the extent of control the company has exerted over our online experience and political system is of grave concern. It's all outlined in a new report by Public Citizen called Mission Creep E, how Google is quietly becoming one of the nation's most powerful political forces while expanding its information collection empire. Joining me now to discuss the report is Taylor Lincoln, Director of the Research at Public Citizen's Congress Watch Division. Thanks so much for coming on, Taylor.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. So you edited the report.
I did.
It talks about how Google has expanded its services well beyond our online experience, well beyond email, well beyond its search engine. In which ways has it done this?
Well, it's doing it through a collection of information from space. It's doing it through a collection of information on thermostats, possibly on refrigerators and other household appliances, through Google Glass, which you've heard about, and numerous other frontiers, possibly even its use of driverless cars, which is an entirely different frontier that Google is on, could be integrated with its location services and other information collection
pretty much every
techniques.
facet of our society.
Every facet of our society.
And of course, it keeps reinforcing its belief in egalitarianism, saying that people can and will choose another service if Google violates the privacy of its users. But of course, the report outlines many instances in which Google has already done this on a massive scale. Can you outline in which ways this has happened?
So a couple of things that's happened are the Google Chromebook that have been so popular in the schools. They gobbled up information unwittingly on the student users, and those cars that have gone around the world taking pictures and mapping the world were caught on numerous occasions gobbling up huge amounts of public information from unencrypted Wi-Fi networks, such as people's email addresses and social security numbers and all kinds of private information.
How does the company ensure that our online worldview is insulated? Because this is something that I think people don't think about. The cookies and all of these things that they do that kind of refines our internet experience that's different than other people, and also just stifled our ability to opt out of being spied on.
Right. I think in part what Google says is we declare that we may collect just about any information. If you read their privacy policy, it warns you that it will, but it doesn't say how. And I think that people have just kind of a general understanding, like you say, that yes, they're collecting some information, but I don't think people understand nearly the extent or sophistication of it or the expanding nature of it. And we don't either, as a matter of fact. That's what our report set out to find out. But I think, you know, when we talk to privacy experts and so forth, I don't think anybody really knows the extent of Google's information collection apparatus, and it's expanding so fast that it may even be changing within Google because they've loosened up their policies over time as they become more sophisticated in combining information from their various services, for instance.
Well, that's terrifying. And you know, as much as Google may publicly admonish the NSA for its data collection services, it remains pretty tight-lipped about its own massive political influence here in D.C., especially when you compare it to other tech giants like Microsoft. This is another really interesting thing, kind of this lack of transparency about its own procedures.
Right. Well, it's not only lacking in the transparency, but I think one thing that may shock people, given how Google does aspire to a higher purpose, is just the degree to which it has succumbed to the most kind of craven influence, time-tested influence peddling techniques of the biggest companies in the country. They are not just one of the largest lobbying forces in the United States right now. They are the #1 largest.
Let's take a look at some of these statistics, because they're mind-blowing. I mean, they've now outpaced Big Pharma. Goldman Sachs spending more money on campaign contributions for this year's election than any other entity. But aside from that, as you just mentioned, they're the top lobbyist in D.C. right now. I mean, outspending Dow, General Electric. What does this kind of enormous financial outputting signify?
And I think one thing that may seem to be kind of a small point, but I think is really instructive, the 4 biggest entities that they gave to was the maximum contribution to the Democratic House, Democratic Senate, Republican House, and Republican Senate election committees. It did nothing for either of them because they canceled each other out, but that is the time-tested practice of buying influence in Washington, is you give a lot to everyone. And I think it's not really surprising that a big company would do that, but I think it might surprise people a little bit that Google would do that because their public perception is so different. And the other thing that I think is far harder to quantify, but probably much more significant, is they are funding nonprofits up and down the ideological spectrum, left and right, They're up and down the content spectrum, all sorts of things, including technology issues. And I think what that runs the risk of causing is that those nonprofits that might otherwise be watchdogs are going to be quiet because they're being funded. And I'll tell you what it reminds me of is what happened with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who had tremendous influence in town here. And they bought up everybody. They bought up the academics, they bought up community leaders, they bought up politicians. And the warning signs were out there about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but nobody blew the whistle because they had essentially too many people had their hands in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's pockets. And I do worry about that with Google. And I want to say, we didn't find that they are an evil company, and a lot of these products are wonderful, and that's why we're here talking about them. But there's cause for concern.
Well, there's huge cause for concern. I mean, just this soft power acquisition, which you're talking about right now, especially fascinating in terms of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Back in 2010, they received a $1 million grant from Google. I don't know how much they've gotten since, but of course, and it wasn't even listed as a corporate donation there. Why is the largest privatized intelligence agency partnering with one of the leading advocates against NSA spying? I mean, that's the real question here.
And I'm going to let your question speak for itself.
Yeah, I think you just answered it. So, you know, according to a recent study also by Servata, this was interesting in the report, internet users actually trust the NSA more than they do Google. I mean, given the stunning NSA revelations that have come out over the last year, what factors do you think contribute to that, given Google's giant push for this kind of really, you know, just humanitarian, like beneficial company that's very kind?
I can't get inside the respondents' minds, but I will say that in my personal view, there is more limitations, more limitations on the NSA than there are on Google. And we found that the NSA, there's questions about whether they're telling the truth. We don't really know what they're up to. So there's big questions there. But with regard to Google, really the only limitation on Google is its reputation. Google says, just trust us, because if we blow it, we'll blow our reputation. But there are really no regulatory limitations on what Google can do as long as it discloses ahead of time. We're going to collect what we're going to collect and use it.
This all comes back to kind of that basic point that people are going to make whenever we bring up questions like this, which is Google's free. It's a free service. Don't use it. If you're so concerned about this, how can we combat that kind of line of thinking, and also how can we make sure Google doesn't take over the planet?
They're going to stop at the planet?
Or space, or everything.
I don't know if I mentioned space earlier on, but they do have satellites going up. So, right.
I mean, so what's your response to that kind of like, you know, just don't use the service and it's all good?
Right. Well, we do use Google, and I'm sure you use Google, and we use Google to report the report, as we said. And so I'm not necessarily sure people have to stay away from it. One thing that I've said to reporters who've asked me about this report is use Google to keep an eye on what they're up to. I just think people need to be really astute and observant and ask questions about what they're up to. I don't think we're at that point where this great evil has occurred, but I think we're at a point where we could get to a point of no return. And I think there are a lot of warning signs out there.
When a company has this much power, we definitely need watchdogs on the ground. Thank you so much, Taylor Lincoln, Director of Research at Public Citizen. Everyone check out the report. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much.